Situated in one of the most beautiful parts of Europe, Cyprus is a popular destination for many tourists looking to enjoy the Mediterranean sun and an island lifestyle. Its natural advantages, however, also have attracted various powers throughout the millennia to occupy the island for its economic as well as strategic military value. To this day, the British garrison troops in Cyprus as the country is divided into a southern Greek portion and a northern Turkish-occupied section. Tonight, our guest, Nikephoros, joins us to discuss the complicated history of this troubled nation in paradise.
Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
A military-industrial complex.
A new world order.
But we are here to destroy the control over the industry of other people.
I did not trade arms for hostages.
Ich bin ein Tier.
На полный разгром немецких захватчиков.
Milita Pavde Tuinci Sinci Podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to the Myth of the 20th Century podcast. My name is Hans Launder. Today I am joined by Adam Smith.
Hey, everyone.
And our special guest over from the TRS network, we have Nike here.
Hello.
Here to talk to us today about an issue and a region of the world that I think many people, especially in North America, don't really understand, and that would be the Eastern Mediterranean, the world of Greece and Turkey and Cyprus. Ancient places, often forgotten and then remembered in times of horrible conflict. Nike, tell us a little bit about Cyprus and why is this such an interesting topic for you?
Yes. Well, Cyprus is currently an independent country in the Eastern Mediterranean. The population of Cyprus is primarily Greek with a Turkish minority. Today, the island exists in a disjointed state where while the Republic of Cyprus is sovereign de jure over the entirety of the island is de facto split in half with a Greek government in control of the south and a Turkish occupation government occupying the northern half of the island. There is also a border line splitting the two regions in half, which is under the control of the United Nations, and also two British military bases that occupy a small but significant portion of the territory to this day.
Why is there a British presence on Cyprus? And maybe as part of that, you can explain the history of involvement with the British Empire and Greece and the Greeks in the Mediterranean.
Yes, the British are there because, well, in one regard, they haven't left yet. After the First World War, well, a bit before it actually, the British Empire took control of Cyprus from the Ottoman Empire in the late 1870s, and it became a dominion of the empire from there until 1914, which time the island was annexed into the crown. It was ultimately a crown colony from 1925 until independence in 1960. The bases were constructed there, as part of its status as a British colony, and the abandonment of those bases were never agreed to by the British upon the eventual agreement to independence in 1960.
So it sounds like that it was part of the decolonization wave that was affecting mostly the. I hesitate to use the word third world, but it's an ancient term from the Cold War. But it was mostly in Africa and Asia. But it's interesting to notice that was happening in Europe as well, or at least near Asia. Go ahead.
Point to make, because the popular understanding of decolonization is white Europeans giving up their colonies and dominion over non-white countries in Africa and Asia, continents that don't belong to the European peoples. This is how people think of it. But in fact, decolonization, especially in the British context, includes places like Ireland and Cyprus, two European countries. And they both follow very similar trajectories, but I think that they are, in a way, treated differently than other instances of, colonial rule collapsing and the process by which the British Empire retreated out of these lands.
Well, another island in the Mediterranean the British still control is Gibraltar, which is at the entrance to the Mediterranean, which obviously has huge strategic value. And I would imagine, similarly, on the eastern side of the sea, the British focused on maintaining something in Cyprus for similar reasons. Now, they also were engaged in the Suez Canal construction and control up until even the 50s, when Eisenhower had to battle the British and the French from starting up a war over there over sort of the remnants of their colonies. But that was also part of this kind of colonial system as well. And it's interesting that they still have bases. I didn't know that. What part of the island are they on?
They have one base on the southeastern and another on the southwestern Greek portion.
So just the Greek portions. Okay.
The southwestern base or eastern base does touch the border controlled by northern Cyprus, but it was never really seen as a Turkish territory. So it's exclusively carved from Greek land.
Do the Greek inhabitants, almost like many of the sort of Asian and until recently European nations, do they like having this superpower, relatively speaking, there, like the Japanese and the Koreans have the Americans there to ward off their more immediate enemies, in this case Turkey?
I'm not as familiar with the current sentiments towards the bases, and the British presence continuing to be there. I can't imagine it's the most popular thing ever, but I don't know how much it comes up in terms of political relevance in modern Cyprus. I think other issues, especially regarding the northern half of the island, take a larger precedence in terms of importance. But I'm sure for many people it remains to be unfinished business. Within the two bases, there's currently over 18,000 people living in them. So it's not a inconsequentially small population still present there. The British do consider it an important strategic location for them to have military staging. I mean, you brought up Gibraltar, and thinking of it, this gives them both a base in the eastern and western part of the Mediterranean, and I'm sure that monopoly on coming and going is something the British feel is very important to their military interests.
Do you know, or maybe you could speak to, why exactly did the British become so involved in the Eastern Mediterranean? Was it really to start sizing up the remnants of the Ottoman Empire? Like, by the late 19th century, everyone kind of had a good read on the Ottoman Empire. This thing is coming apart at the seams, and we're going to have a great opportunity here to sort of carve it up and figure out what we're going to do with the people and the resources and so forth. Do you speculate that's part of why the British became so involved in Greece and in Cyprus? I guess I ask because Greece had been, and Cyprus as well, had basically been under the boot of the Ottomans for centuries, and no one really lifted a finger until there was this sort of, I guess you could call it a terminal decline, or obvious terminal illness in the empire, that people could start go and exploiting it. There didn't really seem to be a lot of sentiment by the British that, we're helping out our fellow Christians or our fellow Europeans or anything like that. It was all very opportunistic.
Yes, I think this attitude was something that was like exclusive to other Eastern Christian nations, like the Russians, primarily. I don't know if I'm not an expert on like the cultural attitudes towards modern Greeks, but from what I understand from the War for Independence in the 1820s, the British interest in it, in this sense of Philhellenism that grew within British culture, sort of viewed Greece as this place that had been encapsulated from time, and almost as if they sort of forgot that Greece had changed over time into a Christian nation, and still viewed it as a people who were ancient, and they had this concept of antiquity and classical Greece that they wanted to save, and so that really inspired the attitude of supporting the Greeks, but from a liberal Enlightenment perspective that I don't think necessarily could be equated with a pan-European or a pan-Christian sense of camaraderie and solidarity.
That was the conflict that Lord Byron died in, correct?
Yes. Yes. He being the most famous British volunteer and supporter of the revolution. Sometimes I wonder, like, how if Byron fully understood the extent to which this was a ethnic and inherently tied to that ethnic sentiment, religious revolution in the minds of those participants in it. The Greeks saw this as a unshackling from the foreign Turkish Muslim domination, and a reassertion of a Greek and Orthodox independence.
You mentioned at the top of the show that Cyprus is an independent nation of Greece and Turkey, at least ostensibly, and I was wondering if you could flesh out why that is. Is it something like the UN won't allow Greece basically to annex it and Turkey to annex their part of it so that they mitigate some of the direct tension between the two? Or is there an independent notion in the Cypriot people that they want to actually be free of both of those somewhat antagonistic powers, and so that they don't get involved in their external struggles? I'm wondering what the independence has to do with like the people versus the external powers themselves.
the attitudes have evolved over time. Where things began with the independence movements in Cyprus were decidedly those for union with Greece. Cyprus wanted to leave the British Empire to become a part of the Greek nation. This concept was called enosis. It's a very significant concept politically, and the term is, hotly debated between the Greeks in Cyprus and the British colonial government at the time. And it is this in particular that foments the dispute between Greek Cypriots and the British colonial rulers, that this was seen as something unacceptable to the Brits, and that their position was more they didn't want to decolonize at all, frankly. Looking into like the attitudes of what the British at the time had felt, one of the things that precipitated this argument was that Suez crisis. With the British no longer able to have its Middle Eastern headquarters in Suez, that was transferred into Cyprus. And so losing Cyprus would be seen on the world stage as like a sign of more to come for the dissolution of British power. And given Cold War considerations at the time, that was something that the British government was extremely opposed to letting persist globally. They wanted to show strength on the world stage, and so allowing this to happen became mostly unacceptable. I mean, eventually they sort of lost that debate in terms of their ability to hold on to their colony, but they were still able to keep military bases present, which, at least for geostrategic purposes, suited their needs, but still came at the cost of the prestige loss of having to abandon the colony, for the most part.
It feels like a forerunner to Suez, basically. Like all the same predicaments that went into the Suez crisis. And, if you ever read about what the British attitude going in was, if we fuck this up, if we lose this, it's over. I mean, we can't really hide behind this veneer anymore. There's this porcelain doll veneer that we've created that, we're still what we are, and we're still this force to be reckoned with, and we're too intelligent to be outsmarted, especially not by the peasant people of the Eastern Med. That kind of mentality really percolated their mindset, and it just, especially starting in the 50s and 60s, it got them into all these, horrible situations where they were horribly embarrassed, mostly because they went into it thinking there's no way we're going to lose this. There's no way we're not going to figure this out. And I could see like the Cypriot base question is a recognition that if Britain can't even hold on to an island in the Mediterranean, how is it even regarded as worthy of being on the UN Security Council? Like, that kind of discussion would need to be had. Like, how is this country even projecting power anymore? It's sort of difficult to ascertain. But the French basically went through the same thing ultimately, where they had to give up their holdings in the Mediterranean. They had to give up their islands. They had to give up Algeria. They had to give up North Africa because they just became too embarrassed with this question of how do we hold on to these places. One comment I wanted to make was that I think part of it too, in kind of re-examining prehistoric Cyprus, the importance of Cyprus. We talked a little bit about this before the show. Especially in the Bronze Age was when Cyprus became thoroughly populated, and it was a sort of a mix of Minoan and Mycenaean and sort of internal Cypriot culture. They were sort of cousins of the Hittites, and they worked under the Hittite Empire at times. The name that was used for Cyprus was Alisaya or Alicia was the common vernacular word across multiple languages at the time. And they were known as being important because they were tough island people that you didn't want to really invade or screw with. But they had access to a very vital part of the Mediterranean, calm seas, natural harbors, not a lot of bad storms in their neck of the woods. They had a lot of copper on the island. They were sort of in a perfect geographic position. And their whole role in that Bronze Age ecosystem was to maintain the trade routes, to act as both a giant harbor for ships, to do a lot of the inventory work and sort of intermediate logistics work for all these trade networks. There was ancient British tin flowing through Cyprus to the Middle East at the time. It was probably one of the most important places in the world. And I do wonder if that is part of the same reason of why it became so kind of critical for the British and kind of leading us into this crisis in the 50s. If you control Cyprus, as with 3,500 years ago, you control the Eastern Med effectively. You're able to control the trade routes, and you're able to control a huge military advantage over anyone else in the region. It was one of the ways, if I recall, that the Hittites actually exercised some level of control over Egypt was through their military holdings in Cyprus. There was always this threat they could dump soldiers off Cyprus into North Africa and immediately start a war at any given time. So I don't know if you kind of see it similarly, if there's part of what, really puts Cyprus into these positions with the British is that it's too strategically important. It's just located too well. You'd have to do what the Chinese do and make it out of sand on a reef if it wasn't there. You would need something there, right in that kind of giant bay formed in the Eastern Med.
Yes, and that's why the Turks had seen it as such a threatening position as well. Why the Turks could not tolerate a union with Greece, as they saw it, it was strategically pointed, literally physically pointed into their what they called the soft underbelly of their country, and having that fully under Greek control was something they viewed as a threat. Whatever validity to that, I have my doubts, but was their stated attitude towards its significance.
Well, weren't there two regions of Anatolia? Correct me if I'm wrong, kind of after Greek independence and the Ottoman Empire is just dead in the water post World War I. There's the Treaty of Sèvres and in 1920, and there's this attempt to start ceding pieces of land in Anatolia proper to the new Greek kingdom. And there was going to be this big chunk around what's like modern Smyrna or Ionia that was going to be granted to Greece, along with most of what's basically now Bulgaria would have been given to Greece. And then three years later, this was undone, the Treaty of Lausanne. And I wonder if that was also part of it. Like there was, the political machinations at the time, in order to get whatever the British wanted out of post-Ottoman Turkey, they couldn't allow for the Greeks to have these strategic territories, inside Anatolia on the peripheries of the country. And Cyprus feels like that as well. He could have had there not been that treaty in 1923, Greece today could have basically zeroed in on Istanbul and probably Ankara within a week. It would have been, at any given time, they could have put them under the heel effect, pretty much, very quickly.
And, looking back on it, we can say, these were the failed opportunities on the part of Greece. Being here today, wanting to see the best for the country of my ancestry, I prefer to have a forward-looking perspective, but I think it is important. On another hand, it is important to recognize the things that could have been, to learn from errors that were made. I think what ruined the Treaty of Sèvres was the Kingdom of Greece's military incursion into Anatolia after gaining these new lands, and I think the failures there were a sign that Greece had overplayed its hand, and that as a cost for that, they had, I guess, effectively forfeit their control over these newly acquired lands, which were populated by Greek people at the time, and had only been depopulated of Greeks shortly after Lausanne, because of the population exchange agreements between Greece and Turkey.
So maybe that can lead us into this crisis in the post World War II era of Cyprus. I know that was kind of the inflection point that you wanted to talk about. So maybe kind of lead us in. How do we get to the Treaty of Lausanne and the internal problems of Greece and Turkey to a near war over control of Cyprus?
Oh, well, Lausanne was before the Second War. That was 23.
Yeah.
The issue in Cyprus was began in the 50s, the Cyprus Emergency, as the British called it. It was a insurgent guerrilla campaign launched against the British colonial rule by a Greek general, Georgios Grivas, against the British. He had led a campaign that the British called a terroristic. I guess the neutral sources just call it insurgent. Depending on how you feel of the particular actions carried out, you could argue about the terms, but effectively what it was just different military actions carried out to weaken the colonial rule by targeting British police forces, military forces, various assassination attempts against colonial governors, things that were done to either force the British to abandon it completely, or at least bring them to a negotiating table with the Greek Cypriot leadership under Archbishop Makarios.
And Greece was kind of going through a civil war at this time. Do I have that right? Like, Greece itself is kind of in total chaos. There's an attempt to preserve sort of the old order, and there's a communist element that's sort of taking hold back in the mainland.
Yes, I believe Grivas himself had a lot of his experience from the Civil War. He first started serving in a military leadership capacity during the occupation of Greece by the Axis powers. He was a resistance fighter during the time, and this would be like the first interaction he'd have with Allied powers, presumably with the British specifically. So it's interesting his history with them, going from a resistance leader that they supported to a person that they lambasted in the press as a terrorist, targeting innocent British colonial security forces in Cyprus.
I think this pattern
Civil War
is
was a little earlier.
I was just going to jump in real quick. You guys, please continue after me with your much greater knowledge of this particular subject. I was just trying to make a loose analogy based on what I'm hearing, is that I've noticed this pattern of seeing, after it's either an occupation or there's a civil war, or effectively it's a very local and hot conflict that effectively generates and selects for a lot of homegrown leaders and heroes, to put a somewhat subjective term on it. And I think once the dust settles with their internal conflicts, there's, for whatever reason, it's either maybe personal ego or pride, or just the simple opportunity presents itself that a lot of these people strike out for more. And you could even look to countries like China, after World War II, where they were fighting an occupation army from the Japanese. After that happened, they went through a huge civil war. Then the Chinese Communist Party was formed, and they went on all these sort of expansionist campaigns. Shortly thereafter, they tried to get into Vietnam. They've been threatening to get into Taiwan for years. They've gone into Tibet. So this pattern, I think, is very recurrent throughout history, where you have effectively a hardened group of military cadres developing, and then they strike out for more. It just seems like that's what might have been happening here, unless there were some long-standing grievances for the Greeks in Cyprus to call for this. But from what I'm hearing, it sounds like the guy over in Greece just saw this as sort of an opportunity. But correct me if I'm wrong. Were the people in Cyprus asking for it?
Yes. This wouldn't have been possible without popular support. I mean, you can't make an insurgent out of a non-committed and apolitical individual. The independent streak and the desire for autonomy has always been strong in Greek culture. One of the things that I discovered upon my research into the topic, that the British commanders who were involved in the Cyprus emergency, they cite as a extreme failure on behalf of the British was allowing the Greeks of Cyprus to engage in independent educational systems. They saw this as a way that in their view, that the Greeks were able to inculcate this idea of ethnos union with Greece into the youth, and that had the British colonial government been more responsible, they would have intervened in the educational system to deny them this opportunity to include a political vision, a Greek political vision, into the education. The way they would see it, that the British, had the British been in control of the educational system, it would have been nonpartisan. But again, I think it's worth noting that that is a political education. It's one of intentional neutrality, and they saw that the fact that Greeks were educated separately from Turks in Cyprus was also a problem, and that had schools been integrated, the desire for independence and even union with Greece would have been stamped out at the get-go. And I don't think they're wrong for having this perspective that they would have been able to stamp out this desire had they had more brainwashing control over the population. But I strongly disagree with the legitimacy of that tactic. I want to know you guys' thoughts on this the use of education as a means of controlling a subject population.
I think we're living in one.
Sounds like a very British. I mean, it's interesting because I think that the education aspect of controlling a population was something that really came about broadly in most European countries as a result of industrialization. Like, how do you have a very codified, very regimented, hierarchical system of education that you can kind of very easily manage what people are learning, when they're learning it, how they're learning it any given day. And it's to create a system for maximum output. And then you kind of decide what you want that output to be. So if the idea is, okay, we need the maximum output of Cypriots who don't cause problems. And don't want to endorse this sort of ethnic nationalism, don't really want to be a part of anything other than work and have some semblance of culture and be good British subjects. The irony is that everywhere Britain tried this, it failed to some extent. Like, it had some level of success, but it often backfired. And I think that the trouble with trying to use education as a means of eradicating people's independence is that it's ultimately not effective if you're committed to that and only that. So the British, by the post-World War II world, could not do the things that they would have probably normally done to more rebellious subjects. Less than 160, 170 years prior, they decided that they were going to just start killing those subjects, and that was here in North America. They couldn't really do that anymore, and so I think that using this education to keep people in a sort of state of non-committance to anything never really works, because people want to be committed to something. Which is why I assume that the Greeks had more success, because they were basically teaching everything that the British were, hard work, good values, trying to be a regimented society. But there is an innate special character aspect to who you are as a Greek or a Cypriot or a Greek Cypriot. And you should embellish that, and you should be a part of something bigger. That's far more interesting than being a part of nothing.
I would add, on the subject of education, there's two main types that you could make a distinction between. And that's the mass education, which is definitely a byproduct of industrial society, and the education of elites. From the colonial days, taking the would-be elite of a subject population and bringing them back to Europe, to one of the high universities, or something like this, and to inculcate them into the imperial structure. And that too also had its great fails. I mean, probably one of the most famous incidents of that in the 20th century was Ho Chi Minh.
I'm not familiar with his particular case. Could you elaborate?
Well, Ho Chi Minh was educated, was sent from Indochina and educated. I forget at which university, but I want to say Sorbonne, but I'm not sure. I don't have that on hand. But I mean, he goes on to lead a revolution against the French. So there's that. I mean, you have others. I think Chiang Kai-shek was educated in the West as well. You have on the mass side.
Even Saddam. I mean, if you're talking about rebellions, you have Saddam was educated at the American University in Cairo, I believe, for a time. And you have a lot of these figures who I think are, whether they go into it thinking, I'm here to trick them and I'm here to learn how they operate. I don't think a lot of people go into it. I think that they go into it and they come out with the impression of, holy shit, I'm smarter than how they think, or I'm smarter than what they perceive. And they really think that they're going to get away with kind of numbing me and turning me into just sort of a loyal subject. The British just had a very poor record of actually being successful at this. They never really convinced anyone of anything. I think the great failure of the British Empire was the only people who, by the end of it, were convinced of Britain's power were the British. Everyone else were convinced that this whole thing was a sham and it needed to be kind of done away with, and it had failed really spectacularly. So I don't know if education even as a form of control works, but I certainly don't think that the British attempt to do it was working. It didn't work anywhere, and it's not really a shock that it totally backfired in Cyprus.
Well, their particular complaint was that they didn't try in Cyprus as they had elsewhere. I'm not an expert on it, but I believe that this was something they carried out in Ireland, like a very controlled education environment, while they were in power over the whole of Ireland. But yes, the commanders, the British commanders in Cyprus, after the fact, cited this as one thing where the British rule failed to act and eventually led to the situation that they faced.
Yeah, I think that if you looked at their after action reports on all of their losses, especially in the 20th century, they would probably say the same thing about every situation they found themselves in. They would say that about especially the loss of India, the inability to, for them, part of their whole mindset towards the sort of the downfall of the Raj was, if only we had convinced these people, or if only we had educated them on what they gain from working with us. And the reality is that, when people feel like they're subjects, it doesn't matter what you try and teach them and how they're benefiting from it. All they really recognize is that they're subjects.
Right. I can't really understand this attitude, this mindset of, well, we didn't propagandize hard enough, and that's why we failed.
I think a lot of it just stems back to the British lost their edge in dealing with especially their colonial subjects. It's hard to say when they lost their edge, but they lost it at some point. And I don't know if America was the first sign of this waning.
I think Germany also was a big sign. I mean, they were competing economically against Germany very poorly.
No, but I mean, in terms of
late
how
19th century.
Well, Germans were never subjects. I'm talking about how they, the Cypriots were subjects of the crown, and this failure to propagandize and brainwash the subjects is a very uniquely British thing, where they always seem to, they didn't always, but they seemed to fail at every turn, and they occasionally had more success violently putting down rebellion. They violently put down China. They violently put down
India.
They violently put down India multiple times. They violently put down Burma. They violently put down many rebellions in Ireland and Scotland and Africa and Wales, and this goes back a ways. But that was only their success. I think that had they been far more violent, and had they really put the screws to the Greek Cypriot people, they might have been successful. But then you're left ruling a pile of ashes. And so I don't know if that's necessarily what you go in wanting. And so I think that it ultimately comes down to the British were on borrowed time, and their control over, especially a place as culturally different to them as Cyprus. It didn't make any sense, and it's not like Hong Kong, where you're basically ruling over a glorified harbor. You are trying to rule over a whole island with real land,
a nation of people,
like a real nation of people with mountains and caves and forests and farms and houses, and it's
a place where you can find distinction within the people living there. I mean, like you were comparing to just having a harbor in China. All right, you can generalize pretty easily, and you won't be too wrong, in making assumptions about who you're dealing with. But when you have a whole island with a very long history of with the people living there, I think it's you have to understand it far differently. And one of the most revealing things that I learned was from interviews with one of the governors appointed there. He was a Field Marshal John Harding, and he was appointed to this position to deal with the emergency, given his history with the Malayan emergency and the Mau Mau uprising prior to this. And one of the things that he found most important and what he did was, in his own words, was opening communication between the government and the media. He saw that when he was appointed to handle the situation, he saw the lack of constant communication with the press as a huge problem, where the colonial government was lacking, and he credits himself with helping the situation by establishing a media presence where there had been none before, and it was his belief that soldiers should be trained to be able to give interviews, that officers should know how to express the narrative of their mission to the press and be able to do that adeptly, with the effect being a propaganda victory. He was also increased the number of actual men on the ground, British troops stationed there to respond to the situation, and made some changes to the rules of engagement. So he also had an increased actual hard military strategy difference added to the way Cyprus was treated. But the one thing I noticed from his interviews was that he seemed most proud and put most value in this propagandistic strategy he employed.
That's interesting. I mean, I go back to the British. Their most successful rebellion put downs were just through sheer violence, the inability in the post World War II era, especially of the West, to do the dirty work, especially in public, was ultimately part of the reason why it all kind of just fell apart. That was part of what really went into the fall of Algeria, was that the French just sort of really ran out of a stomach to deal with mass violence and public executions and poisoning and shootouts and bombs, and it wears on you, and especially when the political winds are changing and the ideologies are all changing, you can't really continue on the way that you used to. I think that for all the British, sort of pontificating on why or how they lost Cyprus, is just an inability to face up to, the old way of sustained blockades and bombardment by the East India Company was probably the most effective way. And they just didn't have the ability to do that anymore. And you saw it fall apart the same way in Ireland. They ran a whole media psyop on Ireland for decades, with the BBC and with the British media in Ireland, in Britain, and it was kind of a failure. I mean, they didn't necessarily gain anything. All they did was they were so blatant in it that most of the British population, or at least a chunk of the English population, began to, I think, feel some level of sympathy or just apathy to the idea of the war, and didn't want to deal with it anymore. No one was really buying this narrative of like the English troop, sort of persevering and struggling as a hero in the streets of Belfast. No one really cared, and most people just asked, "Why is this on the television? Why are we there? What's the logic here?" And I think that had they done that in Cyprus, it might have actually made it worse. They might have actually shown a whole side of this to the English population at home that I think that they were probably trying to keep from them to an extent. They didn't want them seeing what the old empire was still up to. It was still trying to control pieces of the world, and they were far and away different. And Britain at the time internally was a mess. In the late 50s and 60s, the economy of Britain was in free fall effectively.
If you see the English news reel dispatches from the time, the way that the British press had framed it was, the terrorists in Cyprus had just launched an attack that killed so and so many people, and then next thing cut to here's the British police force playing soccer with the locals. It's literally that blatant. And another thing that actually just occurred to me that I think we'd all agree relates heavily to what we see today is that one of the things that Field Marshal Harding did was, in addition to have a greater presence in the media, was use this newfound network and relationship as a means of collecting information about insurgent activities, and I think we see that heavily today, where media is being used as a way to collect intel on dissidents. I mean, the journalist is a spy for the dominant power, and this was a technique intentionally used to as part of the British response to the insurgent activity.
I think the United States Justice Department used Sean Penn and some journalists to help locate El Chapo. If I have that correct, I think that was part of their whole that. If I remember correctly, Sean Penn, the fucking Hollywood actor, was working with the feds to locate.
I knew he gave an interview with Chapo, but I'm not surprised to hear he also spilled the beans on his whereabouts.
Well, I think that they were actively tracking his location, and that's how they figured out where they got.
Okay.
Sean Penn's funny. Didn't he go swimming in the Tigris during the Iraq War or something like that? He went over and the Iraqi people, they're not so bad, and all this stuff. I mean,
well, that makes you question what he was doing there.
I know.
It makes you question. Every time this guy got sent down to Venezuela to hang out with Hugo Chavez, it's in hindsight, he was probably there to try and poison him or something.
Manchurian candidate.
I'm sure that the British definitely were employing that. There's an interesting aspect in that, and maybe you can expand on this. Okay, what was the British attitude towards the Greek Orthodox Church becoming more involved? And if I recall correctly, the Greek Orthodox Church was really spurring this on and was kind of in full, Al Qaeda mode in Cyprus, basically holy warrior kind of stuff.
Yes, the British were surprised by how, radical the church was. They were, you could tell by their statements made about Makarios that they were offended that somebody they saw as a religious leader would not only have so much involvement in political affairs, but two, also not be explicitly against the interests of or the activities of the insurgents. They repeatedly demanded Makarios denounce violence, and he never did. He said he didn't agree with engaging in violent activities, but he would always stipulate that, and to paraphrase, like, why don't you British people take a hint that you wouldn't be facing this violence if you weren't doing something to provoke it, and this came as a shock to the British elite, that somebody they saw as just a religious leader would have such a, I guess, radical perspective. And I think it speaks to the difference in attitude of the church in, especially, the Anglican world, where that's not really, I mean, when you're talking in the 50s and 60s, the Anglican Church is well on its way to losing its influence over British culture and society. And to see something so foreign to them as a Christian leader, like, stick up for the insurgent efforts of his people, was something that I don't think they even understood, and this came as a surprise to them. I mean, I think many of them saw it as a breaking the rules, right? You're a religious leader, you're not supposed to do this, and that he's violated some sort of tacit rules of engagement by doing so. Which made them dislike Makarios, and they actually forced him into exile in the Seychelles after he refused to some of their negotiation terms as they were holding diplomatic meetings regarding independence.
So, going forward from there, how bad does the violence get, and how, what can you kind of describe? What is it that the Cypriots are doing that is so shocking to the British and is putting them in such a bind where they have to try and rethink how they deal with insurgency? So
there was a number of skirmishes that occurred from 1955 to 58. Where the Greek Cypriot insurgent group EOKA is launching a campaign of sort of street violence, propaganda drops, making demands, and engaging in violence with security forces stationed on the island. There was two main separate forces. There were those stationed in the mountains in the western part of the island, and those who were operating in the cities in the center and the east. And from according to the British leaders, they most were concerned with the operations in cities. So you would have actions like just shootings in the streets, bomb throwing, different activities that were meant to disrupt the security state that the British were now redoubling as the crisis worsens.
Interesting. And what was the actual strength of the sort of the Cypriot rebels? So they have thousands of active combatants. Was it sort of a bit looser than that? Yeah, from what I recall, like in the various Greek wars for independence, it was against the Ottomans. It was always kind of a disorganized affair. It was effective but disorganized, and you'd have people who would kind of take vacations or breaks from being a rebel, and then they would pick it up again, and then they'd put it down again. Was it kind of similar, or was there a hardcore standard set of guys that were organized on the island?
It's hard to tell. The EOKA organization,
a truly Mediterranean revolution.
Indeed. EOKA was broken down into cells, and communication was very limited in that regard. So to fully know the scope of how the average cell operated and how dedicated a given person was is kind of hard to know. What I've seen is there were they put the number at 300 fighters involved in the Cyprus emergency, and this is with the initial AOKA force. They would again become an important military force when the Turks invaded the island in the 70s. But when the first mission of AOKA, independence from Britain and reunification with Greece, the numbers that I have say 300.
And what was the status of the Turks on the island? Were they working against AOKA, or were they working alongside the British, or were they kind of trying to stay out of it? Were they fleeing back to Turkey? What did the Turks who were on the island even really do during all of this?
Initially, they were mostly uninvolved. It was between AOKA and the Brits. One of the actions that as governor of Cyprus that Field Marshal Harding employed was the creation of an auxiliary police force. AOKA had penetrated the police force, and it became unreliable for the British to use them effectively as a paramilitary unit. Information would slip, and their operations would be undermined by this unreliability.
Was this like a county sheriff kind of police force? Like it was the police force for the whole island, or just for one city?
I think mostly in cities.
Got it.
I'm not entirely sure how it operated on the ground, but this is mostly with like in the city of Nicosia, the capital.
Got it.
So what he did was created an auxiliary police force and used Turkish citizens to staff it, which can't really be interpreted in any other way than an implicit racial strategy. I mean, when questioned about it, Harding denied that he was using this, racial and ethnic divide to his advantage, but effectively that's what he did. And that's when AOKA started targeting this Turkish police force, and eventually the Turks created their own I guess you could call it insurgent movement, but more so a paramilitary called the Turkish Resistance Organization, and they were started engaging against AOKA forces directly, separate from the Brits, operating on their own. But it was only after this change in policing by the British did it become an ethnic conflict with the Turks as well.
Interesting.
I want to know you got all of your opinions on using these ethnic divides as a way to make up for an empire's own inadequate military strength.
That's a classic strategy.
Yeah, you go back to the American Revolution, the Hessian mercenaries.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who battled with George Washington on Christmas. It's something that not just the British.
It's just an old political science theory,
yes.
And Hank talks about this. You want to pick of two opponents. If you're the sort of third party, you'll ally with the weaker of the two to gang up on the stronger opponent of yours. And if you allied with the stronger one, you might create a future rival. So you don't do that. So you always pick the one that's weaker. And in this case, that would be the Turkish groups. And I just wanted to throw in real quick that I noticed in my cursory review of this subject that the Turks were isolated somewhat in these kind of enclaves throughout the island. And I don't know if that's evolved as a consequence of the more recent conflicts or if it was always that way. But I thought that was very interesting, how that sort of difference emerged. And it's sort of an old model where even in America, we used to have these ethnic enclaves that were arguably socially engineered out of the country and are continually being engineered out in favor of more of a multicultural model. But in Cyprus, I don't know if this continues, but it is something I thought was worth noting. And I don't know how you would necessarily take advantage of that as an imperialist power in terms of controlling territory, but you certainly could use those groups to go out and annoy the surroundings for certain. To control them is maybe another question, but they seem strategically located throughout the island to cause trouble.
Right, and they become of particular importance during the Turkish invasion. Very shortly after Cyprus achieves its independence, the government of Turkey starts clandestinely arming and fortifying these enclaves to the point where they become like actual, like, defensible positions militarily, not just a place that people live. And that's a consequence of these isolated enclaves, being the way they are, that you can just have this enough cohesion in one place to establish things like, I've been hard pressed to find things like photo evidence of what we're actually dealing with when we say fortified, but that's the language that I see to describe them. So I'm thinking pillboxes, bunkers, etc. And that can make a huge difference when you're trying to defend a location. I mean, they play no small part in what you're capable of what power you're capable of projecting from a certain area.
Well, that begs another question that I'm curious about. Where were the Cypriots even getting their weapons? Were they just getting them from the Greek kingdom? Was there some kind of smuggling route, or did they have? Were they? I'm assuming they were probably stealing some of them from the British armories. But were they armed and sort of maintained with equipment from Greece, or were these guys like, full on Finnish winter war, where they're building their own guns and their sheds and they're kind of crafting their own weapons and camouflage and 100% homemade?
Yes, I think they were. They had a mix of sources. I want to say most of it came through smuggling, but and a significant amount of it was also equipment captured from the British. In terms of specific tactics like bomb throwing, those were all homemade devices. The leader of AOKA, Georgios Grivas, he had a lot of the experience to educate and train his insurgents to construct these devices, and disseminated through the different cells the instructions and tactics involved in using them.
And were they receiving any other outside help, or was it really just Greece? Were there any, I guess in today's age, the proxy wars always have like 15 belligerents on each side, vaguely involved in one way or another. Was it really just effectively Greece, the Kingdom of Greece, fighting the British Empire, or I guess post-war Britain? Really, no one else was really involved.
If you can put it on the Kingdom of Greece itself, I'd probably just non-government supporters funding the transfer of arms to these groups. I'm sure it would have caused a diplomatic uproar if the Greek government itself was found to be directly responsible for arming the groups, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Because by this time, correct me if I'm wrong, but everyone involved in this, with the exception of the Cypriots, are in NATO together. They're all in this big military alliance, supposedly against the Soviets. I mean, the Turks, the Greeks, and the British are in one way or another connected to the Americans, who are trying to run the security theater in the Mediterranean. So you kind of have like
trying to think of the timeline. I don't think that had quite happened yet.
Oh, well, I mean, even still, the United States is effectively running the security theater of the Mediterranean, and yet under their noses or under their auspices, you have a low grade proxy war of a kind going on. I mean, is there any kind of clue what the American state thought of this, what the American foreign policy establishment thought of this, or was it sort of was it kind of regarded similar to Ireland, like, vague level of interest, but, just sort of thought of as somewhat unimportant, really?
I want to correct myself, though. You are right. Greece and Turkey had both been members of NATO by this time. But the United States was very supportive of the British at this time. I can't remember which. There's just so many diplomatic international emergencies and crises at this time. It's hard to keep them straight in my mind. But one of these issues that they faced around this time, they had the support of the United States, and in continuity of that support, the U.S. Tacitly gave its support to the British interest in the area. So, in terms of like diplomatic negotiations and how that operated, it was between the Turks, the Greeks, and the Brits on their own.
Interesting. I mean, prior to chatting, I had kind of dug around for this, and I think I found what's basically a paper written at Notre Dame over a decade ago, and it kind of comes across like a freshman thesis paper. I don't know. But it had some interesting history, and basically it tries to lay the blame on the part of later problems in Cyprus, including kind of the uprun to the 1974 invasion by Turkey. It lays the blame on the part of the U.S. And that basically the U.S. had been playing both sides to some extent, that the U.S. had actually somewhat tacitly supported, didn't really offer material or financial support, but had kind of given lip service to the Greek coup, if you want to call it that, in Cyprus, and had also given somewhat tacit support to the Turkish invasion of the island. And that this was some kind of triangulation methodology by the United States, where the U.S. wanted the British out. They didn't want any sort of I guess contested control over the Eastern Med. They didn't want anyone else who had some kind of significant naval presence or military presence. They wanted, so in order to accomplish that, the Greeks had to get the British out, but in order to prevent some kind of, Greek, what would you call it, overconfidence in the possession of Cyprus and uniting with Cyprus, they would campaign against a unification, and then they would allow and encourage Turkey to invade and kind of keep Greece at bay. And in one of our earlier shows, we had talked about how after Turkey had joined NATO, there were several points where the U.S. had to step into the Turkish government and kind of control the country at a high level. One of the ways they controlled it was through foreign policy, and there was a tendency on the part of the Turkish state and the Turkish generals to prefer some kind of plan to rebuild the Ottoman Empire. And that involved planned military incursions of Syria and Iraq as early as the 1950s. And the U.S. had dissuaded them from that multiple times, kind of knowing that it would probably, especially with Syria, it would have sparked a conflict with the Soviets, and it likely would have gotten a lot of Americans involved in kind of protecting Turkey, which no one really wanted to do. And so I suspect that in the background of all this, there's probably a bit of what appears to be kind of the old the Kissinger triangulation, where you purposefully create situations that result in what looks like a balance of power. You don't want anyone to have a one-sided advantage over the other. And so you purposefully do things where you get people to fight a war or take dual control over a territory, and it resolves the potentiality for some kind of violence to get out of hand. Now, I don't know if I fully believe in that theory, but I think it's at least worth entertaining if we're looking for who might have been sort of fanning the flames, particularly of the Turkish response, because there wasn't really the notion of independent Turkish foreign policy around this time just wasn't accurate. Anytime the Turkish planned something big or did something big, it looks like the Americans kind of stepped in and took control of the situation. So if the Turkish were sending equipment to these ethnic minorities, and if they were fortifying positions on the island, they probably got the go-ahead to do so from the United States.
Oh, right. One thing to make clear is that the U.S. definitely did have a more direct involvement in the affairs of the island post-independence.
Yes, definitely.
So, after the end of the Turkish invasion, Greek Cypriots were very vocal in their blame of the United States for what had happened, for allowing the Turks to do what they did. I mean, they understood this very clearly, so I don't even think it's a question of, was this the situation? I mean, people on the ground recognized it, and there were huge protests in front of the U.S. Embassy. I saw pictures of people holding signs naming Kissinger as the person at fault here. So it was well understood, that the Americans had let the Turks reach this point when they absolutely shouldn't have. And it culminated in the assassination of the U.S. diplomat to Cyprus, Roger Davies. He was killed on duty on August 19th in 1974, shot by protesting Cypriots, as far as we know. I don't think the person responsible for his murder was ever caught, but it has been blamed on AOCA.
Well, there was another interesting aspect in that once everything kind of starts to die down, and you have the Constitution of 1960. There's a funny thing that happens where, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's this addendum or something that it basically means that Turks on the island, the Turkish Cypriots, get 30% of all civil service positions and 40% of the military, and that you have to maintain these ratios. But it didn't make a lot of sense because Turks comprised less than 20% of the total population of the island.
Right. And they received a disproportionate representation in government after this constitution was forged. They were even guaranteed the position of vice president. I mean, to this day, the constitution stipulates a Turkish Cypriot holds that position, but the actual vice presidency has been vacant since 1974.
Really?
Yes.
So that
it hasn't been disestablished.
That part of the Constitution just hasn't just been done away with? They just don't fill the role.
Surprisingly, it's a lot of the original Constitution remains as is to this day. It makes no sense to me, but the Constitution made no sense from the get-go. It quickly became a point of contention that the legislature couldn't get anything done based on the impasses that the the assembly allotted to the Turks and the assembly allotted to the Greeks couldn't reach consensus enough to pass any legislation, and any reform to the Constitution itself required approval from, I think, 2/3 of both communities, which is impossible to get 2/3 of these, very different people who've, already shown that they can't get regular legislation passed, much less constitutional amendments, to decide how to restructure things. The Turks know that they've got it better than they deserve based on their actual proportion. They're overrepresented in the government, and the reason for the deadlock is that they're intransigent.
Right. And this basically leads to the crisis of, I guess, 1963, when Makarios starts he starts going to various semi-hostile countries to NATO, or Soviet-aligned countries, and he starts kind of seeking support. And he starts working with the Cypriot Communist Party, AKEL, which was basically a rural thing from what it's written. And this basically, all of this stems back to this belief that the Turkish aspect of the Constitution was so unfair, and the American and British presence on the island was so unfair that he wanted these people out, and he wanted this renegotiated immediately. And if it meant kind of putting pressure on the United States by talking to the Soviet Union and talking to various other countries and looking for some kind of alliance or support, he was willing to do it. He was willing to seek support from anywhere once Cyprus was, quote unquote, independent, was an independent country.
Yes, he was more than willing to reach out, and he was very aware of the state of world affairs. So he understood that if he wanted to get anywhere, making new friends, new powerful friends, would be necessary to this end. And he had popular support by the public in Cyprus to do so. The Cypriots didn't have any qualms about making diplomatic ties with the Soviet Union, because they didn't see any threat from that end. I mean, they knew that they trusted that Makarios wouldn't lead them into a situation where they've traded one dominant power for another. And the Soviet Union had had plenty of good reasons to use this as another, proxy for fighting with the West. If they could take advantage of the situation and use it to humiliate the Americans and the British. One of the lasting roles that Britain played was they were one of the three guarantors of Cypriot independence. During the Treaty of London and Zurich in '59, Greece, Turkey, and the UK were all named as guarantors of Cypriot independence, and it became a responsibility of those three parties to play a role in maintaining that independence. And one of the things that precipitated the eventual invasion of the island was the the coup launched by the Greeks in Cyprus. The Turks used that as the basis for their intervention, and citing the agreement to say that, well, they saw the coup as a threat to the independence. So based on the treaty, that meant they were justified in invading. But Britain also had this the same responsibility, and played a very interesting but reserved role in that in the Turkish invasion.
Well, why did Makarios, I guess, get himself in this situation to begin with? Why did he, instead of pushing for reunification with Greece, decide to compromise and push for independence, which would just, kind of ended up just putting him in a tougher spot because he couldn't really rely on the Greek government, to directly assist him?
He did for the longest time push for this reunification. It was only at the last second with the UK did he change his mind, and that was because the British were about to establish a treaty without Cypriot involvement at all. They were going to just be working with the Turks to decide what to do with Cyprus, and he didn't want that. So it was this very desperate moment where I guess in his estimation that Greek Cypriots would have lost all of their bargaining power because the British were just so fed up with the Cypriot negotiations.
And what was the position of the Kingdom of Greece? Was it just too kind of disorganized to really stand up to this? Were they trying to give input? Were they, kind of trying to push back against Britain? Like, where was Greece in all of this? Why does Turkey get a say, but why not the Kingdom of Greece? How are they kind of left out of the conversation?
I think they had used Makarios as their own proxies in this negotiation dynamic. Eventually, with a change in government in Greece, I believe the Karamanlis administration, they were the first to change their official position from union to independence, whereas prior governments had supported union. This was a new change of direction in terms of Greek foreign policy, and I think it was mostly to appease the British and for economic reasons, to for this new government to gain stronger diplomatic ties with the UK that would be profitable for the Greek economy.
Well, yeah, what's interesting is that at no point in this was there a kind of proposal given to Turkey, like a population transfer proposal, which had been given to Greece by Turkey to the end of the Ottoman Empire. Why don't we just find a way to redeliver the Turks on Cyprus to Turkey, and we resolve this potential, ethnic warfare problem, and we don't put these people in harm's way, and we kind of let everyone go their own direction. Is it just that even if you had done that, would the Turks probably still have probably would have maybe even become more aggressive, because they would have demanded that, in actuality, it's not that there's Turks on Cyprus that we care about. It's that we don't want the Greeks to have Cyprus, because it's a geopolitical threat to us for them to control that.
Repopulation, population transfer was an explicit fear of the Turks. That would have been an intolerable failure for them. They saw that as like the one thing they didn't want to happen, because it had happened in the past in Crete, when Crete was ceded to the Greeks. There were, Turks who were, they kicked them out. And that's not an unrealistic expectation because, frankly, they don't fucking belong there. That's my opinion, but they shouldn't really get a say whether they can stay or not. It shouldn't be up to them. But that was, maintaining a objective analysis here. That was their primary concern, and that would have constituted a total defeat for them.
Yeah, and it seems like that a lot of this keeps boiling back down to, the British and the Americans are trying to maintain some kind of good standing with Turkey for very obvious reasons, and that, Turkey was a vital piece of the security apparatus for not just the Mediterranean, but for countering the Soviets in Eastern Europe. You needed the Jupiter missile sites, you needed the communications facilities, you needed to harden the Bosphorus. Like, there were all these reasons why you needed Turkey, and you couldn't risk alienating them in any way. So you'd have to give them these little kind of, diplomatic wins. You didn't want them to be humiliated at home. I mean, that was part of what was kind of going on with the Turkish ideas to invade Iraq and Syria, was that the Turkish generals and part of the Turkish government really felt like it was one of the few ways they could connect with the population was, we're getting the empire back together. We're showing our strength, because Turkey was economically and politically a backwater in the 1950s and 60s. Like, no one wanted anything to do with it. No one understood it. You had Istanbul, you had Ankara, you had maybe Izmir, and then you had this vast hinterland with millions of people in it, and you had no clue what they were doing, and you didn't want anything to do with them. And you can kind of see this attempt to, like this Kissinger idea of, the ethnic identity and the religion, those are all things of the past. There's this new way of diplomacy, and it's all about stability and balance, and we have to balance the Greeks off the Turks and the Turks off the Greeks. So we'll let the Greeks kind of control Cyprus, but we have to ensure that there is a Turkish presence on Cyprus. Otherwise, the Turks will feel as though they are under attack, and then the Turks might seek outside aid. But, conversely, the same thing starts to happen with the Greeks. The Greeks might think that they're fully entitled to it, and they might start seeking outside aid. Like a lot of these problems we deal with were the Cold War power balancings, mainly of guys like Kissinger, who were ultimately concerned with the Soviet Union. And it's interesting that this stuff persists long after the Soviet Union is dead. And it's not like Greece or Turkey are going to be running to post-Soviet Russia for any aid anytime soon. Is this like still a hot pressed issue between the Greeks and the Turks, or has it just kind of died down and just sort of become the status quo, this division of Cyprus?
So there are flare-ups every now and then. Most recently, I would say the biggest point of contention has been the presence of Turkish oil drilling platforms entering the Cypriot exclusive zone and engaged in offshore drilling. That has caused a huge conflict internationally, and has probably been the biggest point of contention in recent years. They try to hold diplomatic sessions about what to do in terms of unity or official recognition of Northern Cyprus, and that frequently just ends in going nowhere. So it seems like a chronic deadlock. I think the Erdogan government is particularly interested in getting more out of the Turkish position in Cyprus, which could lead to, a reheating of the conflict in the near future. But that remains to be seen. I mean, the modern political context of Cyprus has evolved a lot since this 20th century condition of just being at the balance of the UK and the United States, and whatever they decide to let happen to the country, whereas today there's a lot more parties involved in the goings on. There's a criminal interest in northern Cyprus. It's as an unrecognized state, it's become home to a lot of organized crime.
A lot of Russian crime, from what I understand.
Well, Russian. If you look into it, it's a Jewish criminal organization. As it
from Russia, they're from Russia. Yeah, right.
For money laundering, there's a lot of
well, apparently they're selling citizenship now. Eric Schmidt, the former chairman of Google, has citizenship in Cyprus now.
In northern Cyprus?
No, I'm sure it's the NATO allied part, but I just wanted to,
I would be shocked if he decided to buy citizenship in an unrecognized country. I'm like, what the hell is that? What's going on there?
No, but I wanted to bring up kind of what's going on with the island overall. In the recent years in the news, they kind of got a lot of attention during the Euro crisis about 5 years ago, and apparently there's a lot of offshore banks set up there that are either legitimate or not. I don't know if it's equivalent to the West Indies operations the British set up after the war for essentially money laundering schemes. And I don't know the details, but I do remember that happening. And I do know some people in that sphere of finance that were talking about it very seriously, that there could be a crisis necessitating yet another bailout in Europe. I haven't heard anything since then, though, so I'm assuming they swept that under the rug or fixed it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the goings-on in the banking sector, but I do know that was a big deal for a bit there.
The last I heard was around the time when the Greeks were voting on the a new bailout agreement in 2015. That you hear headlines about Russian gangsters rushing to Cyprus to secure their accounts. I guess because of there was a very real threat of a bank run. And I remember, at least in Greece specifically at the time, there were imposed bank holidays and limited daily withdrawals from ATMs as a specific policy to prevent that. And there was some concern of that spilling over into Cyprus, but I haven't really heard much of it since.
Do you foresee a new kind of civil war going on in Cyprus in the future? Reading up on what happened in like 1967 and 68, for example, where you had basically these small scale skirmishes between kind of guys sent by the Greek junta into parts of Cyprus to attack people or attack positions, and then you'd have threats from Turkey talking about amassing an invasion force and getting tens of thousands of troops ready, and the U.S. would have to go in very quickly and try and calm everyone down. And there was this, massive fear of, war within NATO. What would war within NATO look like? And it nearly happened multiple times in the run up to 74. And you had a limited engagement effectively between some citizens of Greece and Turkey in Cyprus. But do you think that you'll have an actual sovereign intra-NATO war over the fate of the Aegean and Cyprus between Turkey and Greece?
I do think it's a real possibility, and recent developments point to that increasing, not only because of the current administration in Turkey's sort of hawkish, or at least, saber-rattling attitude towards Greece and its other neighbors. But just within the past couple of years, the United States has lifted its weapons embargo from the Republic of Cyprus. For decades, the United States denied any sales to Cyprus, while it has been selling weapons to Turkey for all of that time. It decided that Cyprus, isn't allowed to get any weapons to preserve the safety of the region. Interesting policy there, but only in 2019 was the embargo officially lifted, and I think in 2020, a provision that allowed sales of what I read to be non-lethal weapons was approved. The politics of this are probably a little more bureaucratic than I can fully comprehend, but just from gathering information from headlines, it appears that the United States is going into a direction which will eventually mean the Cypriots are able to reinforce themselves, which could be enough to precipitate the new conflict.
I mean, one of the flashpoints of that era, especially in the 70s, was actually oil rights and mineral rights in the Aegean and in the various islands of the Eastern Mediterranean. And there's all these conflicting zones of control in the sea and in the wider Mediterranean Sea between Greece and Turkey. And basically, you have economic zones of control or something like that, where every country, some percentage of mileage off its sovereign territory, it is strictly for their economic benefit. And then if you incur into it, you're violating international law or whatever. No one cares. But you're basically breaking the rules, and then you can be attacked. And this is like a recurring issue with the Chinese fishing pirates who go around the Pacific Ocean and kind of pillage other countries' fisheries. But between the Anatolian coastline and the coastlines of the various islands, especially the Dodecanese, I think, controlled by Greece, the zones of control are effectively almost overlapping. And it's very hard to tell where one's control ends and one begins. And in the 70s, there were all these questions of oil rights. And at the time, they weren't even easily exploited. They didn't really have the technology or the investment capital to get a lot of that oil. But now, 50 years later, there's plenty of money and technology to do that. And it seems like as they discover more and more and more, oil and natural gas trapped beneath the Eastern Med, it seems like very possible that the zones of control between Cyprus, Greece, and Turkey will become pretty important for who gets to control this energy, especially because Cyprus and Greece are in such dire straits economically. They would be kind of hard pressed trying to get a hold of those resources as quickly as possible.
Right. And, it's not a hard prediction to make to say that the Greeks and the Cypriots will continue to to argue very strongly on behalf of their economic interests in this regard, and that can mean skirmishes with fishing vessels, and you have every year like dozens of incidents of airspace violations. Yeah, I think we'll see more of that, and I think it's going to come down to one party or the other seeing that they have the advantage and start pressing an initiative over the other in a process of gradual escalation.
Well, and I think it'd also come down to where the other interested parties fall. I mean, during the 74 invasion of Cyprus, the British military stationed on the island did not get involved in the fighting.
Yes, they tried to stay back, and if anything, they hampered the Greek military efforts more so than the Turks.
Right, and so that you have that dynamic as well as whether it's Greece or whether it's Cyprus or Greece and Cyprus, it does appear as though the other interested parties in the area are not likely to assist Greece at all, and are probably far more likely to hamper them in their attempt to kind of maintain control of their territory. And I suppose it comes down to, are the Greeks willing to go to war over control of islands? And this comes to like a very kind of quintessential moment for a lot of civilizations. Are you willing to fight it out for control of very small pieces of land? The Japanese Empire basically decided it was willing to fight to the end for control of tiny pieces of land that were effectively valueless for the most part. Some of them had no natural harbor. Some of them had no infrastructure. They couldn't do anything with them. But it was a matter of pride, and it was a matter of territorial integrity and all kinds of other larger economic issues.
And in a longer scheme of analysis, I mean, I think this proves the point that we're even talking about it, is that that the Japanese people are not people who are going to surrender easily, and if you ever mess with them, there's going to be hell to pay. And I think that's either on a conscious or a subconscious level operating in a lot of personalities of peoples, and it may not look on a short time horizon to be a rational decision to fight over something that is, by all objective standards, a pile of rocks. But if you let that go, what's next? And where do you draw that line? And these are things that are harder to answer over a long time period, because your pride, but also your reputation is at stake. And the question is, are you willing to defend yourself? And I think if you look at the broader situation European peoples find themselves in, I think most of the world views Europe as a group of people that aren't willing to defend themselves. And so I will take my hat off to these quarrelsome Mediterranean types that are willing to fight over rocks if it means their people get to survive. So there's my 2 cents.
Here's hoping we win.
The Spartans went to war.